Whenever you sit down to a scrumptious meal, it doesn't take long for someone to ask, "Where's the bread?" Whether it be cornbread, biscuits, bagels, or just a plain slice, there's bread to suit every discriminating taste. Bread is such a popular item that the average American consumes a whopping 53 pounds of bread each year. No wonder Dr. Davis wrote the best-selling book, Wheat Belly. The early breads were unleavened before the advent of yeast. Archaeologists found evidence of bread dating back to 4000 BC, and we know from a biblical perspective that unleavened bread was used at the Lord's Supper. Unfortunately, as the waistlines of Americans continues to expand and foodborne allergies and illnesses are linked to wheat products, various diets are continuing to be designed to minimize or eliminate carbohydrates and wheat-bearing products from our daily diets. From Atkins to Paleo to South Beach to Keto, the war on bread wages on. Did you know there's even bread etiquette? When there's a bread basket that's on the table for business or formal meals, the bread should only be eaten when there's a main course on the table, not before or between courses. Drats. Did you also know that the only bread you butter in its entirety is a piece of toast? A pat of butter should be placed on the side of your bread plate with you tearing a bite-sized piece of the bread or roll, buttering only that section to be eaten and not the entire roll. I also bet you didn't know that the bread plate should always be passed to the right, and if you have a loaf on the table that needs to be cut, the loaf should be covered with the napkin or towel, with only the exposed portion being cut that you intend to take. Finally, no group dipping. No group dipping. If you have olive oil, each person should have their own dipping dish. Trust me, folks, we are not keeping score on this one. Sadly, once COVID-19 hit in early 2020, people found store shelves emptied as the supply chain in many areas was disrupted, causing product shortages. The shelter-in-place orders found consumers returning to bread making, a favorite pastime, since they knew they had flour, milk, eggs, butter, and sugar. Yes, COVID separated the chefs from the fetch. So in spite of the war on carbohydrates, wheat belly, and COVID-19, Americans love bread. And that love affair does not seem to be ending. So tonight we're going to demonstrate the ever so popular yeast roll, loved by many, but mastered by few. Sit back and relax and take great notes. This show promises to give hope to all of our bread bakers who gave up long ago on the art of making yeast rolls. Hi, I want to welcome everybody to another segment of Tabernacle Talks. And we're really excited about tonight's show because we're going to feature a demonstration, and we call this series Cooking with the Pros. And I searched long and hard around the region to find out who the top bread makers are in the area. And consistently, a couple of folks just kept giving me the name Lorraine's Rolls. So today we are going to be featuring a demonstration from Lorraine Wallace in making yeast rolls. And when I tell you they are amazingly scrumptious, you won't want to miss this show tonight. First, let me start off. When I asked Lorraine, why did you get into the art of bread making? She said she's been making these rolls since she was 12 years old. She said she used to sit at the table and wait for her mom to make the rolls. And one day her mom just said, "You need to start making these rolls." And for any of you that are Food Network followers, the most recent Food Network featured a whole set of articles about bread making, because now that people have been sheltered in place with COVID-19 and they're not able to go out to restaurants as much as they'd like to, people are getting back into the art of cooking. So tonight, when we show you the demonstration, because this is a family secret, we're not going to be actually giving you Lorraine's recipe. And I think those of us that have heirloom recipes certainly understand why we're not doing that. But I would strongly suggest that if you have a yeast roll recipe, that you just kind of pull that out and make notes in your margin, because we are going to be showing you the actual demonstration, because the art of bread making is about patience It's about knowing the steps of how to add your ingredients, and there's certain steps that are absolutely essential for your bread to rise and for you to have just a beautifully brown crust on those finished rolls. There were some other questions I asked Lorraine, and I'll just kind of go through some of those before we begin our tape session with her. I asked her, excuse me, is there like a special pan that you use? She said no, she doesn't use a special pan. I asked, do you prefer a gas stove over an electric stove? She said she's used both. I used an electric stove when I actually finished the recipe, but obviously a lot of people prefer gas cooking, and we'll give you some tips about when you actually are placing those rolls in the oven. It's a family recipe, and she's a perfectionist because as we were watching her, and you'll see in these clips, she would, do things and then clean her counter space. So she's an exceptionally clean cook. And in fact, she said, if you want to come see my kitchen before you ask me to do this demonstration, I'll be more than happy to do that. And so we were real pleased with that. And so as we walk you through the steps tonight, I would encourage all of my bakers out there in the audience, if you want to make this recipe and then actually post it on the site, I would encourage you to do that because we're going to be real excited about seeing how your product turned out after tonight. So let's go to our first clip. And we're going to talk about the ingredients. So there's Lorraine. Hi, Lorraine. And we're actually going to show you a shot of the ingredients that she has. You're going to see 2 eggs on the table. She actually prefers gold medal flour. She prefers domino sugar. She prefers a rapid rise yeast. So when you're looking at those ingredients, she's very specific about using domino sugar. She said that she's tried other sugars, but all sugars are not the same. So you'll see the ingredients. So if you have your recipe in front of you, make sure that you see you have milk, you have sugar, you have flour, you have butter, and you have yeast. It's a very, very simple recipe. Now we're going to go to step 2 to show you how she's actually going to combine those ingredients. So you see her dissolving the yeast, and she just used 1 packet. I was fortunate enough to be able to watch her. And she says you need to make sure that your yeast is dissolved. And that's an extremely important step. And she actually warmed that water in the microwave. And then you see her adding her eggs. She's adding her 2 eggs into the mixture that has the warm water and the yeast. And we're stirring the eggs. And then you're going to see her pour that liquid mixture into her large mixing bowl. And you know what was fascinating? You're going to see Lorraine add the milk, and I was fascinated because I'm like, where are your mixing bowls? Where are your spoons? She said she's used this same mixing device forever, her cup, and she knows exactly what to put in there. So you see her milk. And she said she stirred the milk just to make sure she got all the additional yeast, if there was anything around the side of the mixing cup, that she stirs her milk so she can get the rest of the yeast. And then she pours that into the liquid that's already inside the bowl. And then she stirred and said, I know the consistency just from the feel of it. So she adds just a little more milk. Then this is her butter that she's melted. And she's going to pour the majority of that butter into this mixture, but she is going to retain some of the butter because you have to be able to dip your rolls in that. And again, that was 2 sticks of butter that you see melted. And that's what she's retaining so that you would actually roll your dough on that after the second rise. Now I can tell you this recipe was pretty sweet because she's now going to add her sugar to this mixture. So for those of you who don't need to eat a lot of sugar, you may want to find another recipe that doesn't use this much sugar, but this is the recipe that she uses, and she can tell by the consistency and the thickness of the liquid how much sugar she needs to put in there. And then you see she's going to add a little bit more sugar. And again, she emphasizes domino sugar. So now she's going to mix the liquid together. To make sure that it has a smooth consistency. And I would say she was probably able to do this in about 4 to 5 minutes. It was really, really quick. So for those of you who have struggled thinking that the actual mixing the ingredients together is the challenge, that's not the challenging part of bread making. So now we're going to add the gold medal flour. And again, she does all of this by memory because she's been making these rolls since she was 12. And you're going to see that she's going to mix the dry ingredients with the wet ingredients to make sure that she completely mixes all of those elements together. And she's just taking a smooth, sweeping motion to get the bread together. Now what you're going to see in the next clip is when you actually see the dough prep. So she's going to continue to mix, and you're going to actually see the dough. So if we could roll that clip. So now you see she's just kneading and mixing with her hands now because it's become thick, so you can't use the fork anymore to be able to move the ingredients. And now you're going to see she's going to flour her surface, and she's going to turn the dough out on the surface. So hopefully all of you in my audience are still following that she's taking everything out of the bowl and putting it onto the surface so that she can mix it together. And actually I like the technique. If you notice that she's folding it over itself, placing it into the flour. And I can tell you it was really light as a feather to actually watch her do this. She's not placing a lot of pressure onto the dough because she's trying to keep air so that it's light and fluffy. Absolute excellent technique to actually roll the dough. And again, she's lightly flouring again so you can see that she's rolling the dough onto this surface. And I think she did this about 3 times. And again, you'll see there's a light pressure. She's not squeezing it or squishing it all the way onto the surface. She's just being very light-handed in how she's manipulating the dough. So again, technique is extremely important. Now, I watched that demonstration, and I can assure you it was pretty quick. I was thinking that it was going to be a long, drawn-out process, but it wasn't. So we probably have maybe 7 or 8 minutes that it actually took her to make that dough ball. So now she's going to place the dough into a container And I believe we've got a shot of that because now we're actually getting to the section where the dough has to rise. And in speaking with Lorraine, she says this is the part of the process where cooks get really anxious and they don't want to wait. They want to take shortcuts and do things that interrupt the rising process. So she placed the dough in a container and we waited 4.5 hours for the dough to rise. And the trick that she gave for the rising, she said you can turn your microwave on. Don't have the bread in there. Don't have the dough in there. Turn your microwave on, let it warm up, then turn the microwave off, and then you're going to place the bowl with the dough inside your microwave. You're going to cover it. We covered it with a napkin, and then we're going to let it rise for 4.5 hours, and it'll double in size. After that, we go to the next thing. We're going to show you the actual dough after it's risen. And there's a technique called punching it down, so we're going to show you that. You're going to stick 2 fingers to make sure your indentation stays inside the dough. Then you're going to punch it straight down. Don't twist your fist. You're just punching the gas from the yeast out of the dough so that it circulates through the mixture. So you're just going to punch it down. And I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes because you don't punch the dough down. You just start at that point and you start making your rolls, and you don't want to do that. So after you punch the dough down, we're now going to show you how to actually shape the rolls. And we thought this was a great technique. I use the technique because I actually took the dough that she gave me and actually shaped it. So now I'm going to show you the technique that I used. I took a knife or a cutter and I actually cut the dough into pieces. And then I pulled the little pieces like you see in the hands of the demonstration here. And I just kind of made sure it was still light and fluffy. I lightly dusted the surface. I pressed the dough out. And then I pinched the corners. I just pinched the corners inside themselves like you see here to form like a little ball. And then I took the ball inside of my hand and rolled it on the table. And you're keeping the side of your hand on the table while you're rolling it into balls. And he's gonna show you that technique. So you're gonna see that the side of his hand never leaves the table. That stays on the table, so whether you're right-handed or left-handed, put your side of your hand on the table and just roll those little sections into balls. And they roll perfectly. And there's really light pressure that you're placing there. You're just keeping your hand on the actual table and you're rolling your dough balls. Now I'm going to show you the dough balls because it was pretty fascinating. And I just used a standard pan. It wasn't so you'll see there are the dough balls that have been rolled using that technique. And you can put them close together. I wasn't concerned about them overflowing. I had a pretty large pan, and I wanted to make sure that all the dough balls were placed in the pan. That made quite a few rolls, and that was like half of the recipe that she normally makes. Hopefully I haven't lost anybody. You guys aren't afraid out there, okay? So once you get the dough balls, there's a second rise that has to happen with your rolls. So now that those dough balls are in your pan, you have to sit them out for another hour. So I covered those rolls with a wet cloth, and I waited about an hour and 10 minutes, and they will double in size again. And then by that time, probably about 45 minutes in, I had turned my oven to 375, and you've got to have your oven on 375 and preheated. And then the secret that Lorraine gives on cooking those rolls is when you place them in your oven, you place them in your oven for 15 minutes. Then you're going to turn the pan. She says you're not going to cook them longer than 25 minutes. And she said, and this is a big mistake that people make with rolls. So the first 15 minutes you cook, then you're going to go back to your oven and turn the pan. And then you're going to cook another 10 minutes. And they're not going to be brown on the top. They're going to be brown around the side. So then you're going to broil them. You're going to turn the broiler on to brown them. So that means you have to really pay attention to make sure you don't burn them. And we're going to show you what the finished product looks like after they've been in the oven about 25 minutes. And I think we've got a clip of the finished product. So there you see the finished product of those yeast rolls. And when I tell you they were absolutely perfect and soft and bouncy and round, they were everything and then some. And I'm going to tell you, I have tried to make yeast rolls. I have cheated. I have used a bread maker. I have not punched the dough down. I have not had good luck with yeast because I wasn't patient and waiting for things to rise. When I followed Lorraine's steps, those rolls were perfect. And we're going to show you we've pulled the rolls apart so you can see in the next photo as I'm sitting there having my coffee. Perfect yeast rolls. Now, I can tell you these rolls are very addictive. They freeze well. They taste good. This is something you can quickly make up for Thanksgiving, but I would strongly suggest that you leave a lot of time so that you're not rushed or feel that you have to take a shortcut, because you really do need to let them rise 4.5 hours for the first rise. You have to punch that dough down, and then you have to let it rise the second time for about 1 hour and 15 minutes. And if you do that, I can assure you, you are going to have perfect rolls. Perfect rolls, and I mean delicious, excellent rolls. And I can tell you they're fluffy, they're soft, just perfection. Now, my little secret is I didn't just eat 2 of them, so I will confess, and I don't know that anybody just eats 2, but I thought for sake of the order, I would tell you that I just ate 2. Nobody just eats 2 rolls. So I'm going to challenge everybody, pull out your favorite roll recipe and go back and look at the techniques, because it is about technique to have perfect rolls. And if you follow these techniques, I can assure you, you're going to have perfect rolls. So I'm going to challenge everybody, make those rolls for Thanksgiving and send us a note and let us know how it turned out. This is Dr. Michelle signing out, and have a happy Thanksgiving, and let's see how your rolls turn out.
On November 24th, tune in as we see and talk about fashion. This show is for the cute and those who think they're cute. That's right. Everyone with initiative can look amazing this holiday season, and we'll be joined by local designer Patheria Woodson-Zachary as she talks about what's hot and what's not.
Well, that's a wrap for today's program. We hope you leave inspired. Thanks for checking us out, and we hope you tune in next week, Tuesdays, 6:30 p.m. on YouTube and Facebook Live. Share with family and share with friends, because that way the love and circle